Hey, what's up, Triple P Nation? This week's episode is brought to you by Triple P Life Nutrition, helping you optimize your health and performance.
Welcome
to the Age of Awakening.
Please identify yourself. Enter.
What's up, Triple P Nation? Welcome back to the podcast where this week, like every week, we're going to explore the tools, tactics, and strategies to help you achieve personal and business mastery. You know, the mission of this podcast is to help entrepreneurs and professionals learn and grow in the four key areas of life, which is mentally, physically, spiritually, and financially. So you can start living your best life because you deserve to, right? All you need is the resources and the mindset. You can make it happen. And that best life is what we call a triple P life. I'm your host, Dr. Jay LaGuardia. I want to welcome you, especially if you're new to the show. If you aren't new to the show, welcome back. We appreciate and love each and every one of you who join us each and every week. Hey, listen, if you haven't done so, hit the like, share button, your notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Check us out on YouTube. We're on YouTube now. Love seeing everyone over there. Comment, subscribe there as well. I respond to all your comments. Why? Because I care. I really do. And because this is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. And even though this is kind of the setting of a monologue, I really feel like we're having a conversation together. So I want your feedback. Your feedback really lets me know what direction we're going, if it's the right direction, if we need to make some shifts or changes, or if there's topics you want me to cover, anything, right? This is a community, and together we're going to grow and expand together. And so I love hearing your feedback. And if you need to, you could also reach out to me. And I respond to all my emails, Dr. J at Triple P Life, Dr. J at Triple P Life. And let's connect. If there's something you need and I can help, let me be a resource. Now, before I get into my interview with our very special guest this week, who is Cassidy, she's a mental performance coach for professional athletes and high performers. We're going to talk to her about overcoming some of the challenges that people deal with, the mental obstacles and blocks for high performers, because you guys are high performers. So why not speak to an expert who knows how to overcome those? And we're going to get to Cassidy here in just a minute. But before we do, it's time for our weekly success snacks, which is entitled Why You Don't Need to Wake Up Early. I know it's the antithesis of everything you hear. What do you mean, Jay? You don't have to wake up early. Follow me here, right? In a world of entrepreneurship and self-development, people all the time love talking about how early they get up, right? You have the 5 a.m. club. You've got the rock stars who get up at 4 a.m. Well, maybe not rock stars, but rock stars in performance. And of course, Mark Wahlberg, he gets up at 3:30 a.m. But I ask you this question. Do you really need to get up that early? Maybe, right? There's nothing magical about getting up before the sunrise. Although I love doing that. I love the mornings. I love the newness and the freshness and the clarity of mind, but it's not for everyone. So I do love the sunrises, but it may not be right for you. See, for some people, the mornings may be the best time like it is for me, but because they can work distraction free and because the rest of the world has yet to get up, that's why I like it. Or it could be because they're super productive early in the morning. Again, another reason why I like early starts. Now, you have to find the time that works for you, and that's the key. So maybe you like to sleep in because you work late, and that's totally fine. But it's important for you to find your magic time. So, whatever time of day or night works best for you, prioritize that in your schedule because even just a few hours of deep and uninterrupted work can really move the needle forward in your life. And so, whether you take time to work on your mental performance, whether it's before you go to sleep, middle of the day, or whenever you can grab it 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, but you got to do it every day. But if you find a time that's right for you that works better than getting up early in the morning, then so be it. Make it happen. And if you're one of those people who likes getting up early, that's great too. Here's the beauty of it. You get to decide. It's your journey. You find out what works best. And here's the other thing too. It may change over time because it did for me. I wasn't a morning person. I am now. So it may change over time. The key is just do it and do it consistently and watch the results that you receive. Hey, Triple P Nation, welcome back. As I mentioned this week, Cassidy Preston, who is a mental performance coach, is with me. So excited to have Cassidy on here. As you guys know, we talk about mindset and high achieving performance and so on and so forth. And, you know, it's kind of like a parent. You hear the same person talking about the thing over and over, you stop listening. So why not have a different voice with a different take and some different experiences? So, Cassidy, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dr. J.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely. So, look, you and I were having a brief conversation before we went live here, and you asked me how I got into this work because I don't think anyone starts their career going, I'm going to be a mindset coach. I think it kind of happens through our own personal experiences. So tell us how you got into this work before we can get into the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, I came into it for my own self-preservation as a hockey player. I grew up in Canada with the Canadian dream of playing in the NHL and felt pretty flat in my NHL draft season. Didn't go well, so obsessed about the results. I was working on my mindset, my mental game, and knew how important that was. And it wasn't very tangible or obvious, or I didn't have a good repeatable system all the time. And so I struggled for about 10 years throughout my career, and then went to school to learn more, read hundreds of books on the topics, and as well as get to learn from like Todd Herman and John DeMartini and some great people in the space to curate my own system of strategies and also concepts on how can we think differently and improve our mindset in high performance. So obviously we work with a lot of athletes, but it applies to all areas of life. And so that's kind of like this big void for myself, for my own like 16-year-old self, of like trying to get to the next levels and achieve my dreams, and then struggling with the mental game along the way, kind of built a big void in myself. And I can dive into some of those stories in more depth, but that's the short summary of it anyways.
How long you been doing the work?
So I finished school, like my PhD, about 6, 7 years ago now. So in 2018, I finished, or the January 2018. So, and then I was doing it. I actually started mindset coaching with athletes probably when I was like 19. I started a hockey school that was called Complete Hockey Training. And we do a little bit of like goal setting mindset stuff, though very little I knew back then, but something, because I knew it was part of it. We would actually do workouts in my basement and go shoot pucks at my buddy's garage. And then we do a little bit of mindset work. So I've always been interested, but probably the last 10, 15 years, I've been doing it more as like an actual with my education and other work. And then the last 7 years, pretty much full time since I finished school.
And that's very cool. So
Yeah.
What is your PhD in? Then is it
In
in
sports psychology.
sports
Yeah.
psychology? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like obviously we just had a Super Bowl not long here ago, and it seems like all the top athletes, especially like in the individual sports, golf and tennis, they all have their mindset coaches. It's become so commonplace. Where
Yeah.
before, it was rare, and in some ways looked down upon or frowned upon, is that maybe you're mentally weak if you need a mindset coach, which
Yeah.
actually you and I both know it's the opposite, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
becoming very pervasive in sports and also now in business. So talk about this transformation that's begun to happen where, just like having a fitness coach or a nutrition coach, where mindset coaching is becoming so commonplace.
Yeah, I think it's this really untapped area. If you think about how can we be a high performer and get in a competitive edge, or just overall optimize our impact in the work that we do? Well, there's obviously your capabilities, your business or physical, technical skills, and whatever endeavor, whether that's an athlete or in business, or as a surgeon or any kind of vocation. But if you're not in the right mental state, like it's going to hold you back. And I talk a lot about mindset, and I'll use this analogy of like, because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't get mindset. Like, just go be confident and take action. And I'll be like, I'll play with people. I'll be like, yeah, no, like mindset is like 80 to 90% just about taking action. Go do the work, prepare. If you take action and consistently, put in the work and prepare yourself, your mindset's generally going to be in a pretty good place.
Sure.
But the other 10 to 20% is where I really come in and work with people. And I'm sure the similar work you're doing, where it's about the thoughts and the feelings, and there's getting a little tangled on the inside. And if you get tethered and tangled up here, well, now it's harder to take action. And then if you're not taking action, well, now it creates a downward spiral. And so a lot of our work is to get alignment and how they're thinking, feeling, get clarity on how they want to show up so they can take the action. And snowball. And so a lot of athletes or high performers or anybody, it's like they're taking action, and all of a sudden, chaos, pressure, expectation, stuff comes up, thoughts, feelings, emotions get tangled. And then if they don't know how to unwind that quickly and effectively, well, then it can like affect their performance and their well-being, especially in some of the professional, people I work with, like whether it's an accountant or hedge fund manager or surgeons. And it's also just like your life, right? And like the pro athletes I work with, a lot of it's even less about their performance on the field and more just keeping perspective and managing the different stresses in life that allows them to go perform well. And so when you think of like a professional setting, a lot of people are like overwhelmed with all the different hats that they wear, and they don't have clarity in who they want to be and how they want to show up. Well, it not only does that hurt their performance, but it's also just sucks, right? Like it just eats at them, and there's a never ending to-do list and the stress and the frustration and, not feeling good about who they are and how they're working, instead of like building momentum and owning their capabilities and making progress and learning. So we can definitely shift that approach and that mindset. And so now I forget the original question, but the so but the premise being, it's definitely becoming more open to it because it's a competitive edge, and it's people are more open to it because it just allows them to enjoy life and they don't have to untangle this stuff by themselves.
Sure.
And yeah, so that was so I did remember the question, but that was about a couple rants within it, so I went a little off the track.
Well, I think you hit something early on there that I want to start first with is you talked about, how these limiting beliefs or these I call them aligned energies, right? To succeed, you need aligned energies in thoughts, behaviors, and actions. So your thoughts have to align with the actions and your behaviors and do it consistently enough to get the results you want. But you and I both know that so often that they're not aligned. And oftentimes it's the thoughts from conditioning and subconscious programming, and really from the age of 2 to 9 or 12, depending on what resource you read, as our subconscious minds are developing and our belief systems are being formed. So you talked about tethering, and sometimes it's not even a tether. Sometimes it's 150-pound lead ball that's holding them back, and they have no idea how to
Yeah,
let go of this, right?
yeah,
That's holding them back. They may have all the intellectual ability, physical ability, all the other things, right? The discipline, all that, but they can't get past getting over these limiting beliefs. How do
yeah.
you start with that, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, no, there's a couple different ways of looking at it. We have an assessment we'll have people come in and do. And so there's the things you want to work on or the mindset you want, like confident, composed, the focused, resilient, centered, all these different attributes on that side. But on the flip side, well, when those drop, it's usually because of a limiting belief. We use those words a lot, or mental block. And it's these beliefs or narratives often as well that are not true and not serving. And so those could be things like, my confidence, I'm confident when I'm doing well. And if I'm not getting, results or things, that I lose my confidence. Well, as long as you keep telling yourself that and you believe that, then it becomes a perpetuating problem. So when we work with somebody, one, the assessment helps point us to the right direction. And then the second part is often like shining a light on it and being like, yeah, you might think this is true, but like, is it true? Right. And it's like almost like some people walk around thinking that 2 + 2 = 5 because they've been told their whole life that 2 + 2 = 5, but it doesn't. Like, and
Right.
until we can show it with a light and help them uncover it, and then have them stop using the narratives like, oh, well, I am this way, or, I'm just a person where 2 + 2 does equal 5, and that's just what's true. Like, it says who? You're saying it's true. And so we can challenge people, and I like to use like we're a mirror, helping them see their blind spots and uncover it, and then help them untangle it or let go of the big boulder or let go of the conflicting thoughts and feelings, and uncover that so you can get back to taking action, move forward, have that alignment like you speak about. So those are a couple of the ways, and there's lots of other interesting things that we use around like acceptance and commitment. We avoid the use of positive, like just be positive. Like what? Like, no, how can we be grounded and centered? And then we'll talk a lot about intrinsic drivers as well, but happy to go into more of those in depth. But the first level is like the narratives and the limiting beliefs, and be able to, put a flashlight to it. So it's like, oh, I can now see that differently. And this little light bulb goes off in the head. It's like, oh, I don't have to keep calling myself that or keep looking at the problem this way. And I can look at it a little bit different. That frees them up to then, accept it, let it go, and move forward. So,
Yeah, you mentioned, and I remember I probably even gave this advice myself back in the day, right? Just be positive. And Norman Vincent Peale really wrote a very influential book about positivity and so on and so forth. And not that that's not good advice, but it's not realistic advice.
yeah.
Because someone who's stuck in a constant state of fear or anxiety or depression, you're setting them up for failure, right? So you've got to provide them the tools necessary. You've got to give them some understanding that's more involved than just being positive.
Yeah.
So, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because I do think sometimes that could be misunderstood and could be frustrating for people.
Yeah, for sure. I'll say in a couple ways. One, it's often a pet peeve or frustration of mine because I'll go on like a 10-minute rant with somebody and like helping them look at a problem, see it differently, make the most out of it, own it. And they're like, I'm like, what do you take out of it? They're like, so I got to be more positive. I'm like,
Right?
no, no, no. Like, no, it's not. I didn't use the word positive once. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a couple reasons why, and you touched on them a little bit, but the reasons why the word positive it's not a bad word, but
Right.
we want to be cautiously using that as a strategy or advice because, when you're in a tough situation, you're not just going to be positive about it. Like it sucks. Like it's hard. Like there is toughness. And so we're not going to ignore this side, the negativity or the struggle or the drawbacks. And now that doesn't mean we just be all negative about it. That's not the solution either. And so it's to see both sides of the coin, and when you do that, what do? You can get to grounded, you get to equilibrium. You can still have passion, you still have values, and you want to move forward and drive, but you're doing it from a much more grounded place. And so it's a much more sustainable model to your point. And it doesn't mean we don't have some emotions and highs and lows, but we're now riding the wave a lot better. And so throughout my day, it's not like I'm just positive all the time. Like that's unrealistic and not healthy. And like anybody that gets super elated and highs, and a lot of the people that are big preachers of positivity, they'll often have like huge polarities in their life. And they might be like high, 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 and then they'll come crashing down. And so it's generally not helpful advice for that. There's actually some good research that highlights people that overvalue and highly value around being positive and being happy, particularly, often highly associated with depression. Like
Hmm.
it's because they're just, oh, I got to be happy that, everything about life is being happy all the time and being positive. And oh my God, I'm not that depressed, like
Yeah. Yeah.
elated, deflated, inflated, down and out. And so instead, it's like, well, what matters? Having a meaningful life, like you're going to be happy and there's going to be, sadness and emotions that come and go and up and down. But if your mindset and your approach to life is not about positive and negative and more about being grounded and centered and moving forward, well, that's a way more effective and healthy way to live. And so that's how I'd break that down. John DeMartini's work on this has been, quite fascinating and thought provoking. So yeah, we use, grounded, centered, neutrals, a common one by Trevor Moad that passed away. He wrote the whole book on that. So it's a really good different approach to looking at this judgmental world versus a more, driven, growing, moving forward world.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Dr. DeMartini. I had him on the show not long ago.
Oh,
Just a
nice.
super, super guy, brilliant.
Yeah.
Really, a leader in this space for sure. And you talk about equilibrium because it's such a really good word. It's life, man. You're going to experience up and downs,
Yeah.
right? And if you feel upset or angry or depressed, that's normal.
Yeah.
Okay. If you feel excited and elated and joyful and happiness and loving, well, that's normal as well, too. You know, getting to a point where you can manage your emotions and be more selective in the emotions you choose to experience. And I call that, conscious awareness. I think is where we can be more intentional and be more directive in kind of where our life goes. Would you agree with that? Not agree with that? I mean, because look, I understand there's some depths of despair,
Yeah.
that need some serious, serious help, right? But for most people, if they can be more conscious and aware of the emotions they're choosing, they can be more intentional to choose something different. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, 100%. A couple ways to break that down is like, who are we as people? Like, and when we take the approach of who I am is what I do or
Right.
achieve and the external things, you're losing the autonomy and the choice for how do
Mhm.
you want to show up and who do you want to be instead of being the author or the narrator of your life, where you can be aware of your thoughts and feelings and awareness and your experiences, and then choose how you want to show up and move forward.
Sure.
And that's a lot more powerful place. And then one of the ways from a pragmatic, applicable place with this is also like the idea of symptoms and the two different approaches to life. And so you think of like that positive, negative, and this, judgmental world where people get sad and really worried and anxious, and then they get super happy and then recklessly like and there's like oscillating here. A lot of people will live in that. They're like they go from like, oh, and then like, yeah, and like, oh, like, and they go up and down. Like there's just never really at that equilibrium state. Well, that approach, that's a symptom. And it's a symptom of living in an approach that's outside in, generally to speak. Whereas
Mhm.
like they're like, well, when things aren't going my way, I'm sad or I'm worried about, will things go my way? Their outside is affecting their inwards mental state. And so it's a symptom of their judgments, their mindset, and their approach to life. And vice versa. And you never have this without having some of that. It's like, and meaning like the sadness, they're going to get happy. Now, the degree and like you said, like the level, and there's also these other things that, not going to speak about in the terms of the chemical, the more clinical depression side, but general with the feelings and these, emotionally charged things, as John talks about, there is this polarity. But when we flip it and we're like, okay, well, let's change our approach to life. What approach do we want? And if we want this inside out, which means we get clarity on who do we want to be and what matters to us and how do I want to show up? And then we still live in the outward world, right? And so you think about like a basketball player, I think it's just an athlete. It's not like, they'll focus on who do they want to be, but then they're like focused on the game, like, and they're living in the game, but they get grounded first and then apply themselves to the game. And so same thing in life. You get clear on who do you want to be, then you go live in the day to day and you interact with people, you do the work. But if it starts with who do I want to be and how do I want to show up and being grounded or equilibrium, then we're going to manage the waves a lot better, because we have that inside out approach. So it's a simple way to look at seeing those emotionally charged emotions as symptoms versus like, oh, that's just who I am. Like, no, no, you get to choose who you are. And if you do that from an inside out approach, it's a lot more effective, healthy, intentional, like you're referring to, conscious awareness, intentionality in how you live is an inside out approach. So that's how I would speak to that.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like it. You had mentioned earlier doing your assessment and evaluation about intrinsic factors. Would you
Mm.
touch on those? What are some of those things that you're looking for?
Yeah, a good way to look at that is like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And the problem is our society is highly consumed with extrinsic motivation, right?
Sure.
Achievement, fame, status, recognition, praise, all this stuff, which does matter. And in business, that can be money and profit and these things, or getting the promotion and next levels. In sports, it's winning status, get next levels contracts as well. And so those things matter, but it's understanding the difference of, yes, I'm motivated by that. And that is the external goals versus what is the intrinsic reasons why you do what you do.
Mhm.
And those are, and most people lose touch with this. And there's a couple ways to look at this. Those things are first like growth. We all intrinsically value to grow and learn things and embrace challenges. We like to, the experience. What is it we enjoy doing and understanding, the connections, the type of people we're around, and the contribution and service. When people stay connected to this, it goes a lot better and a lot more impactful. And I use this example a lot with like investors and different investing people I've done, or just talking about intrinsic drivers. I'm like, you probably couldn't pay me enough to spend 8 to 10 hours a day studying businesses and which ones and their numbers and which ones I should invest in. Like, I'm not in, like, I won't do it, can't do it. Like, I'm not in, there's no intrinsic drive. And sometimes people are like, well, why are people getting into investing? As just an example of business. Well, they're just in it because there's a lot of money. Well, yeah, sure. Like that's the external goal, but they actually like the process of doing it. And so if they lose sight of that, though, they'll get stressed and frustrated and go in an outside in approach, just focusing on the external things. So when we work with people, we want them to look and reflect at, like, what are your intrinsic drivers? What is it about your process and who you're being that you enjoy for the sake of itself? And so it's there's a couple other ways you can dice that up, but that's kind of the fundamental way of looking at it. Like, I'll share a quick story I like around a how this 105-year-old lady got a bunch of kids to quit playing the sport that they loved, like within like a month. And so the story goes, this 105-year-old lady's got this beautiful backyard with flower beds on either end. And the kids, a bunch of 12-year-old boys, love playing there because they play football and they catch this football in the nice soft flower beds for the touchdowns. Lady doesn't like it, it's ruining her flowers, but the kids love it and they're just playing all the time. And so she's like, all right, I'm going to yell at these kids, stop playing, don't come back. And the kids are like, screw you. We like playing too much. So they keep playing. So she's like, I got to come up with a sneaky plan. She thinks about calling the cops and she's like, I can't do that. They're just 12. So she comes up with this very clever idea and she starts to pay them all to play. They all get $5. And at first, the kids are like, this is sick. Not only we get to play this game we love, we're getting paid to do it. And that goes on for a while until they're getting $2, then $1, then 50 cents and a quarter. And the kids are like, screw this, we're not getting paid enough anymore. And they forgot why they were playing in the first place. And that is so true for athletes, but anybody in life. As we climb, why we start doing something in the first place, there's intrinsic drivers. And as we climb the ranks and go through life, we can get sucked into the allure of the results. These things matter, but they're not the main why. And so that's what we like to get people to reconnect and find those intrinsic drivers because they're the greatest source of motivation, resilience, confidence, and growth as well.
So it's interesting. Obviously, the languaging is more technical in the sense of external or intrinsic, extrinsic drivers. I think John or other personal growth gurus would call it your why,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I mean, is
Yeah.
essentially what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the keys too, right? When people are setting goals, is why are you setting the goal? You know,
Mhm.
why are you going to be engaging in this behavior, making these commitments, doing this work? If you don't really understand why, you've got zero chance of, unless just luck just happens to strike you, of
Yeah.
really accomplishing any of these goals. So I think it's so powerful that you're able to identify for these individuals, or maybe in some cases, reconnect them
Yeah.
to these intrinsic drivers. So would you say at the core, this is one of the biggest issues often that you deal with high performers, that they get disconnected to their intrinsic drivers?
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the fundamental ones. And the way that I'll explain in a couple ways. One, I'll talk about the origin story, which is Todd Herman's work with
Hmm.
the alter ego.
Yeah.
But the other one is just simply thinking about what's the main reason most people get into their own head, right? Whether it's an athlete or in a work environment and a high performer in other areas. And generally, it's because of that outside in approach, which means they're putting their priority, what matters most, the results, people pleasing,
Hmm.
what other people think, getting the attention, achieving their goals, which is one of the problems, or like it's a double-edged sword being ambitious and setting goals, right? Because it's like when you start set goals, then you start assuming it, like consuming about the end goal, and then that starts to weigh on you, which then hurts your mindset. And if your mindset's not in the right place, then things start you don't less likely to achieve the goal. And so there's nothing wrong with having goals, and you're naturally, if you're a high performer, you probably have them anyways. But how strategically do you go about it? And if we can instead shift the mindset to be and the approach to go from, well, the primary thing is the goal. And yes, I got to focus on my mindset to get there. And then we go like, no, focus on your mindset first. Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Yeah, there's the end goal over here and there's a connection to it, but let's focus on this for the sake of itself. And when we start with that and get clarity around that and stay connected to that day in, day out, well, then the actions flow and the results, you're more likely to get them. And more importantly, you enjoy the journey. And so that's that shift. And that's what my book, Mindset First, is all about. It's like, if you can prioritize this for the sake of itself, their mindset, your mental state, why you're doing something, who you want to be, and how you want to show up, everything else is going to flow. And so, but the mistake is most people are like, yeah, no, I want to focus on my mindset so that I get results. Well, you're really still results first, right? And it's like, and of our very results oriented society and world, it's easy that people get consumed with that. And that what happens? The weight, the stress, the frustration of results weighs on people, and then their mindset and their mental state suffers. And they're having that outside in approach. So we need to flip it and shift the priority, because only one thing can be the most important. Now they
Sure.
both matter. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that this doesn't matter. Results matter. Like, the bottom line matters. Like, winning matters. But which one are you prioritizing at the start of a day? What's your approach? And so that's a fundamental shift. And then just to quickly give the origin story, because a good way to look at this is first on what it's not. And when we think your why, your intrinsic drivers, it is not a list of like, well, I love doing this, and like, and some boring list. Like, it's not going to probably be helpful. It can be useful to do. So often when you said like, oh, we help people find that, a way to think about it is a story. It's like, so when was the moment where you really fell in love with your sport, or in the first moment where you're like, hey, this is who I want to be and how I want to show up. And that's an origin, as Todd talks about it, where the mental state you want really started to blossom, or the void was created, where the value came out in John's work. And a story is way more powerful than a list,
Mhm.
because now, see, if you can go back and remember that moment, right? And you think of yourself, in the work you're doing, you alluded to at the beginning, it's like your own self-preservation. There was probably a void and a value that was created, and that's why you do what you do, right?
Sure.
It's the same for me. Like, one of the big things of why I do what I do was that when I was 16 years old and I fell flat on my face and all these things that happened that year, because I was so consumed with results. And so I created this huge void and value to better understand. That's my intrinsic driver. And now, is it a list? No, it's a story that's personalized to each person, because that story creates the feeling of the emotions and the intrinsic drivers. Versus it's just a list of like words. The words don't You don't need words. It's a feeling, and that's an important and maybe helpful way to look at when you're thinking about your why, or a person's why, or their intrinsic drivers, and who they want to be and why they want to show up that way in the world. So yeah, that's a couple ways I would round out that question.
I love it. I've never thought of it in that terms, but you're right. A story is always far more powerful than just a list of words on a piece of paper. Oftentimes when I'm teaching seminars and things like that, I always tell my story because it makes me real. Like, whether you're going through it now or not, or have previously, or might in the future, I'm with you, man. I've been there, right? There's times I'm
Yeah.
still there now.
Yeah.
So it makes it so much more relatable and connecting too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And that's why, yeah, I like in the book, I share a bunch of my stories. Some pretty, negative and tough times, and some just, ridiculously stupid in some ways, but it's just like humanizing the process. And I share other, pro athletes and people's stories as well around, that's just common. Like, we're
Yeah.
all getting our own head. We all get consumer results. We all struggle with doubt and worries and these things, but can we learn to look at it differently? Can we learn to have principles and strategies that are personalized and practical that work for us, versus just be confident and be positive and don't worry? Like, what? Like, that's phony, fake, cookie cutter stuff. Like, let's get to the dirt and get in the mud and do the work and be honest about, who we are and where we're going. And but the stories, and when somebody owns their story, it's powerful and it's inspiring. And so, to your point, sharing that, it's like, it helps people connect. It helps give them, they can get insight out of it and learn and grow and be inspired from it. So there's all kinds of powerful things that happen when somebody owns their story, when they can share their story, when they know their story. And then now you can write your story too. Because if you don't own your story and don't become the author and the narrative of the past, then it's hard to write the future and write the next page and be the hero of your own story. And so it's fundamental kind of principles and ways of living that I think are really good. And again, pretty lost by our culture and society. People aren't focused on their stories and being the author of their own story. They're just like living life outside in, letting other people dictate their story and tell them what they want, don't want, what's good, what's bad, what judgmental, like living in this, very dependent on external things, versus getting clear on who you are, how you want to show up, what matters to you, and where do you want to go. So,
Well, it's very common now in our society too, right? Because everything is about how do I feel? How do I feel, right?
mm,
And there's an of that that's important, but it's so much broader than that. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
It's not just how it makes you feel, but how it impacts those around you is in alignment with the goals of your family, your team, your work, whatever the case may be, right? Are you moving in the same direction, or are you the headwind? And there's
Mm.
so much to it there. So here's a question I want to ask you. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was watching a golf tournament, and there was two guys that were in a playoff, and it was mano a mano. In fact, it was at the Waste Management. I don't know if you had seen it,
Yeah.
where the
Yeah. I heard about it. I
Canadian
didn't
won.
watch it yet. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Canadian won,
Yeah.
and they had these playoff holes, and these guys were just going at it, and they were supporting each other. But I mean, I think they said there was about 1 million people on the
Yeah.
grounds. Now, not where the playoff hole was going on. There was a few 100,000, but still, two
Yeah.
guys, TV
Yeah.
cameras, and if you've played, anybody's played golf, man, it's sort of playing when you're playing in a foursome, let alone with 200,000 people around you,
Yeah.
for a championship. So how do you help work with really, really high performers in a sense that dealing with failure and staying in the moment and just working the process and one shot at a time, and don't think about the big picture. Oh, if I miss this shot, I'm gonna blow the tournament, like,
Yeah.
because any high performer is going to get in high pressure situations where it's going to call on them to perform at their best. So how do you prepare them to perform at their best in the highest pressure situations?
Yeah, a couple ways. I'll start with the fundamental thing just to reinforce it. Because if you're in a high pressure situation and your priority is results, and you're an outside and you have this outside in approach, and you're like, hey, yeah, I want to focus on the mindset and be cool, calm, collected, and confident and attack. And I have this mindset, but what's really weighing on you're like, but I need this, have to, should, oh my gosh, look at all these people, all the results, the money, the fame. Like, if as long as that's the priority, it's gonna be tough. It doesn't mean it's not doable, but it's gonna be hard to be consistent with your mindset and your mental state. So again, if we can get them to flip that, then it's going to be a lot easier. Now, there's still other things to do. We'll talk about coping planning and mental rehearsal and reframing failure and success. But the first fundamental thing is like, and I call it the realm of the super elite, where like they show up day in, day out. Their priority is, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? Because because now whether you win that playoff hole or not, it doesn't define you. What defines you and their definition of success is how they showed up. Did I go
Hmm.
through my pre-shot routine? Did I go through my process? Did I use acceptance commitment? Did I focus on who I wanted to be? And was I being the player I want in that moment? And so when they have clarity on that and they focus on, like, it's not that this doesn't matter, but they're able to let it go, move past it, and they can just focus on their mental state. Now, the other tangible things around pressure, you brought up, one, which is the failure and the thought around failure. Well, and this applies to everyone, obviously, and so does the last point. But when we frame failure as a bad thing, you're you're in for it. Like, you're going to be worried about it. And so, and this comes from a lot of John's work again, where it's, of course, the goal and the intent is not to fail, right? We don't want to fail, but the goal is to succeed and to win and to get the results. But and you show me an athlete that's getting really frustrated after a lot of failure, or a person that's getting frustrated when they don't get the business or get the different results. Well, that's somebody that's not accepting the range of results. And that has a fantasy around achieving success. So winning the tournaments, coming in first, getting the raise, getting the outcomes that we want is not a fantasy. There's drawbacks to winning. Now, it's still the goal and the intent, but we don't have to sit here and think that it's a fantasy and it's all sunshine and rainbows, and nobody wins all the time. And you're not going to be liked by everybody if you win. The other person doesn't like it. It's just a result. It's a goal and intent. And so when we can accept the range and look at it and see it for what it is, for success and failure, and we see that when we fail and we come up short, or we make a mental mistake, or we make a technical mistake, or we just misread the pot or didn't quite close that deal, it is what it is. We're a lot more equilibrium again going through it. And so there's a post acceptance, pre acceptance. So if someone, I'll just use the golf example, I shank one into the waters. I'm like, oh shit. And I'm pissed. Well, one, I'm not accepting after the fact. I was like, oh, I got to accept. I made a mistake, learn from it, move forward. So that's post acceptance. Well, but if somebody does that and they're instantly pissed and reacting that way, that emotional charge, that tell me they're not doing pre-acceptance well, which means before the shot, I need to accept the range of results. Because if I do that, I'm going to be more present. I can commit to how I want to play and what my process is and my mental state. And when you do that, you still could make mistakes. You're less likely to because you're in a more grounded, centered state. And there's not just judgmental, emotionally charged fantasy, mindset. And then what happens is if I did make a mistake, because golf's difficult and the ball might go in the water or whatever, then I won't be as reactionary where I'm like, oh my God, right? So like that pre-acceptance actually helps post-acceptance. And so, and now I want to just elaborate on acceptance a bit before I get into the last piece with coping planning, where when we say the word acceptance, a lot of people are like, ooh, like, ew, like they think it's like soft, right? Like, oh, that means you don't care and you're indifferent to results and you tolerate failures. No, no, no. Acceptance is actually a superpower.
Mm.
Acceptance is about seeing things for what they are and embracing it so you can grow and move forward, right? The samurai used acceptance before they went to war. They accepted that they might die. They said goodbye to their families that they might not come home. They didn't want to die. They want to live. But by coming to terms with it, they can overcome that fear of failure, the fear of death. So they can be fearless in the moment. It's not that they had no fear, but they could overcome it. Versus like, oh, I'm so afraid to die. Like if you can't accept dying, don't go to war, run away.
Right.
And right, like I use this all the time. That's like, you can't accept the range of results. Don't play golf. Don't play this. Right. I did it with a surgeon who does difficult surgeries. And this was a different type of conversation where it was like, okay, helping athletes accept they might fail or not or whatever in the range of results there so that they can commit and have that attack mode and fears because they've overcome, their fears. But the premise being with the surgeon was this is a little bit different. I was like, he does surgeries and they're not always going to work out. And I was like, I don't want you to be indifferent to your patients, living and dying. But the reality is, if you can't accept the burden, like if you can't accept the range, like don't be a surgeon. This is not for you. Like he's like, oh shit, no one ever said it to me that way, and it
Sure.
helped him lower his heart rate. And he was already a great surgeon and does well in his work and is like a lead in the hospital and stuff in his department. But it was like helped him even lower his heart rate more, be more present, adaptable, prepared throughout the surgeries. And he was wearing like a heart rate monitor and stuff. So this principle is actually, I call it like a superpower. If we really learn how to do it, which is about perspective so that we can accept things. So that's, the point around, the pre-post, and that's going to help us deal with that fear of failure and all this. And then the last big piece and, really direct to the pressure aspect is coping planning or planning to cope. And so in sports, that's like, oh, well, I know I'm going to a big tournament and I might be playing in the finals of the end with all the people on. And, I've got a 6-foot putt to tie it, or if I miss the 6 foot, I lose. And it's like, oh, it's like, well, how am I going to deal with that context? And we can, use like, and so the rehearsing, not the putt, but the managing their emotions. And so it's like you're going to give a speech or someone's has a big business sale and you can rehearse, how am I going to manage the context, the emotions that might come up, and how will I process them and accept them and, commit and show up and and who do I want to be in that moment? By rehearsing that's like mental rehearsal for how do I going to respond? And then you're way more likely to respond that way. The more you set the intention, rehearse and be clear, and then reflect after. And there's a constant growth process. But the premise, you're planning to cope with a stressor, a distraction, or an adversity, right? They made a mistake, right? Oh, ball's not, right where I want it. It's in the rough. Okay, well, how are you going to respond to that? You're going to accept it, respond. The more they prime themselves, then when they get there, we don't want it to happen. We don't rehearse themselves making mistakes, but we might rehearse like, hey, ball's not in a great spot. Didn't get quite the outcome. And you're feeling frustrated. Okay, take a breath, respond. And so they're planning to cope. They're training their mind. This is how I show up. This is how I respond to things. And so in the more working world, the business world, that's like, hey, start your day off with setting an intention. Who do you want to be today? How do you want to show up? How do you want to respond to any distractions, adversities, etc.? So how can you create an environment that better supports that as well? Yeah, great question. 3-pronged answer to it because I feel
I think you
all are needed. But yeah, go
I
ahead.
think I think you crushed it. You really did. I loved it. I love the you talked about the pre and post acceptance, and I think just personally when it comes to the competitive nature of golf, and I talk about it a lot because I love the game. To me, it's one of the greatest tense, the greatest measurements and attempt to control emotion, right?
Yeah.
And elevate your emotional IQ. And the actual pre-acceptance is something that I've got to work on. I know because when I go to make a shot, I visualize the shot I want to make. I don't
Mhm.
even contemplate the other shots that are
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So when I don't get the outcome I want, it makes me upset. So
Yeah.
now I'm going to look at it very differently. Well, I
Yeah.
could shank one in the water, I could put one in the woods or right down the middle. I'm okay with either. I don't
Mhm.
prefer the other two. I
Yeah.
prefer this one,
Yeah.
right? Because inevitably it's going to happen. I'm not a
Yeah.
professional golfer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I've never contemplated it that way. So
Yeah.
take that you did a little bit,
Yeah.
but take that into the business world.
Yeah.
You talked before about, potential sale or client call, whatever the case may be, right? Similar in a sense, what are all the outcomes here, right?
Yeah.
What's all possibilities? They may
Mhm.
buy, they may not buy. They may choose to take some time to think about it. They may call you a butthead and hang up on you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And and you talked about, that acceptance becoming the superpower and the way of overcoming the fear of failure. Man, because we all have it,
Yeah.
right? So even
Yeah.
the very best salespeople don't bat 1,000, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what I love applying this. I once had someone come in. What was their job? Some investment guy where he literally his main job was cold calling.
Yeah.
And he came in, he's like, I get really nervous about worried about making calls, don't always make as many calls. Cause his batting percentage, he like a good batting percent. I forget what the number was now. I think it was like if he makes like books 8 appointments out of like 200 calls. So it was
Ugh.
like 4%. So that means so like I was like, you don't need a program with me. Like you just need to accept that you're gonna fail 192 times out of 200. It's like if you can't accept that, don't do your job.
Right.
Like, and I was like, because if that's what you're aiming for, you're trying to get 8 out of 200 just to like book in a call with him, like a booking a follow-up call or a thing or
Yeah.
whatever call. I was like, if you can't accept that, you're like, don't do it. And I was like, he's like, oh, like, all right, like pre-acceptance. Well, now he's not like worried about doing it. He can go and do it. And if he doesn't get it, it's like, hey, he's just you got to almost want the 192. That makes sense. Like in a weird way. Like you like, and that's a good sales, you go get into that. The psychology, like, oh, I'm afraid to not get the sale. No, like that's part of what we're doing when you're
Sure.
making sales. Like you don't want to get them all like, in a weird way. That probably means you're not charging enough, like to potentially, but like depending on what the sales thing was. But the premise again around that pre-acceptance is very powerful and liberating. Like if you go into any kind of sales negotiation and you feel like you have to get the sale, you don't
You're
have the
done.
power.
Yeah, you're
Like
done.
you're done, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's the same with anything though. It's like, oh, I have to get this podcast. I have to do a really good job. Like I choose to show up and do the best I can. I don't like otherwise I'm putting unnecessary expectations and pressures. It's going to stress me out, and I'm going to be worried about it. And then I'm probably like less likely to be engaged and conversational and share, my insights. And so whatever it is in life, that pre-acceptance is a very valuable grounding, centering kind of principle. And so yeah, that's how I would generally apply it. Now there's other nuanced things and very, different areas. And a lot of it is about people pleasing as well, because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, well, I got to, my boss as an example, or my colleague or the person I manage, and I got to go give them feedback or talk about them or hold them accountable. And they're like really worried about everyone liking them or stepping on their toes. And it's like, well, no one's liked by everybody all the time. So if you can't pre-accept that you're not going to be liked by everyone, or like you said, people might call you call you names or something like in a situation, like that says more about them than it does you. You know who you are and how you're showing up.
Absolutely.
And so again, that's a pre-acceptance and certainty in who you are and self-worth and self-reflection that gives a lot of power. So you can just be you and you're not phased by all the different external stuff that gets thrown around in the world. So yeah, that's a great point to bring it into the working world.
Okay, so quickly, planning to cope. When you talked about managing your emotions. So good, positive and negative. In other words, I get the outcome I want. I don't get the outcome I want.
Mhm.
Are the strategies similar as far as managing those emotions?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. I would say it's probably more common to plan to cope with an outcome you don't want, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Like,
Yeah,
oh, I
sure.
got adversity, shot went in the water. How do I respond? Versus, hey, I got a birdie. I got three birdies. Got a sail. Like we do want to cope with that, and we use reset routines, especially with athletes, or hey, a way to get recentered, use acceptance and breathing, and then recommit to who you want to be. Yeah, it can be definitely used for both. One of the simple strategies, and you're already using it yourself, but your language matters. We're disassociating from the results versus, oh, good shot, bad shot. I'm good, I'm bad. Like this judgmental good, bad inherently makes it harder to accept, and you're going to go way more oscillating up and down versus like, I like that outcome. Got a birdie. I really like it. Don't like that shot. Didn't like it. Like and then we can let go of it because it's not inherently a bad shot. Like it's just a shot. Like if you were trying to
Sure.
put it in the water, then it's good.
Right.
So not that we usually do that, but but if you were, then it would be like you did a great job at it. Need to clean the ball. Like I don't know, but so a new way to look at it. But the premise being, then we can again pre-plan like, hey, how am I going to respond to this? What kind of language am I going to use? What approach am I taking to the game? And again,
Sure.
just to, I'll give you a little golf advice. Guarantee your mental game with golf. If you go back to the number one tip, if you go in, your priority is not what do I want to achieve today? What do I want to shoot? What score do I want? That's not the priority. That's a goal that matters. Make the priority. How do I want to play? Who do I want to be? What mental state? I want to have
Yes.
confidence, composure, swagger. I want to trust myself, commit, use pre-acceptance. That's a long list. You might narrow it down. There might be different, you might have a slightly different mental state on the tee versus an approach shot versus putting, a lot of similarities, but hey, I'm very clear on who I want to, my priority is to do this today. And you can have like a mental checklist. And then after every hole, every shot, how was my mindset? And I want to get that better. Your score will naturally get better.
Sure.
Um, and your mindset and your enjoyment will be better. You won't be as frustrated when you're like, and you talked about like that pre-shot. It's actually quite counterintuitive to be like, oh yeah, what's the range? Accept the range, and now I can commit to being in the fairway. Like you know what I mean? Commit to exactly where I want to go,
Yeah.
and but that's a mental state first and foremost, and you'll probably have more fun because the game's quite fun. Anyways, for whatever that's worth, I just
No,
want to bring it back to that.
it really is, and my listeners know, right? Because they know I like golf, but
Yeah,
I think golf is a really great metaphor and analogy for life. So is
oh
baseball,
yeah, yeah,
right? Because you fail so much more than you succeed in the
yeah,
terms of failing, succeeding.
yeah,
You can go to the Hall of Fame, play 20 years, and fail 7 out of 10 times and go to the Hall of Fame.
yeah,
So I always thought baseball players are probably the most mentally tough athletes when it comes because they, again, the
yeah.
success rate is so poor. So one of the coaches mental coach that I was following, he said, you can on a par four shoot a bogey, get a five,
Mhm,
and out of those five, you shoot four really good shots.
mhm.
And what do we focus on?
The one.
The one bad shot. And we
Yeah,
take
yeah,
that. And that's what we're thinking about at the next D box.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So we didn't cope very well.
yeah. Exactly. Not
So
accepting it. Yeah,
same thing in the business world,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You could have done a really good job attracting the lead, scheduling the lead for the call,
Mhm,
getting the lead interested in your product,
mhm,
but just that last part they weren't ready for.
mhm.
And but we don't acknowledge the 3 steps we took that was so successful up to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And and to me, I think it's such a valuable thing, especially in the business world, and also in sports, where owning our wins. We want to build that as a habit because most people are not taught that. And as humans, we're naturally inclined to focus on what? Risk adverse. If you screw up, you die. But like we don't live in that generally world anymore. It's like we want to build a mindset that wants to thrive, not just survive. And so when you're golfing, it's like, hey, own the wins. What am I doing well? What's getting better? What am I working on? What's my progress? And we stack up this mindset where we can own our capabilities very readily because we're writing them down. And so as a business owner, you write them down every day. Like, what are things I did well? What are the things I did well this week? There's always wins. But often we're too busy trying to fix or work on the weaknesses, which I'm not saying don't do, but you can't overlook the own the wins piece because it's incredibly simple but quite impactful. And so it's a good way to look at, another way of looking at your mindset and making sure your approach to life and to the, and to sport or whatever it is, optimal for your performance. And so, because it's definitely not going to help you accept it if you're just always focusing on this. There's a different way, and let alone a better way, which is where you own your wins, your capabilities.
Yes, it's been a lot of fun. I see over your left shoulder is your book, Mindset First.
Mhm.
So tell everybody where they can get it because they need to go out and buy. I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to learn. I want to play better golf, man.
Yeah. Yeah. No, get it. So it's mindset first, break free from the weight of results, play with confidence, and perform when it matters most. And so it's definitely written more from an athletic perspective, but I've had
Sure.
lots of people, and it definitely applies to business, life in general. And it's a quick, easy read. The way we did it was very trying to make it as condensed and practical and easy to use and read. And yeah, the best way to get it is on Amazon. So go to Amazon and just look up Mindset First and should be able to find it. And if there's bulk orders, anybody want to order for their team or for their business, then they can reach out and we can do a discounted bulk order as well. So it's yeah, no, it's been fun to have it out and enjoying it.
That's great, man. Fantastic. And if people want to reach out and learn more about your coaching, because I know you've helped over 10,000 athletes and high performers, where
Yeah.
can they do that?
Yeah. So my website is drcassidpreston.com. You can read about me and my work. And then my team is at cepmindset.com. And so we're almost at 16 coaches now in total, performance coaches, and growing quite quickly. And you can just, read about our programs and options there. And then the first step is always to book in an intake call with our admin team. And then they set you up with the right coach from there if they're interested. So, and that's again for not just athletes, but like I said, whether it's an entrepreneur, business people, surgeons, whatever it might be, want that little different edge, somebody to see those blind spots, be a sounding board with you. Definitely a great benefit. And coaching is the best way to get fast and effective results. So
Sure.
it's a good way to look at it.
Any online resources they can tap into, things that they can download or anything like that?
Yeah. So on our website, CP Mindset, we've got lots of blogs and videos on a lot of the different things like an alter ego, reset routine, personal scorecard, stuff like that. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out, and then as well as following us online at CP Mindset on Instagram. I post a little bit on Twitter and LinkedIn at Cassidy Preston, and yeah, you can check us out there. I've got there's some webinars and things here and there online, but the main things would be that newsletter and blog posts are the best like free kind of content. And then when they get the book, there is like a PDF download and stuff too. So it's like actually a worksheet that goes with it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
this has been fun. I really appreciate you coming on. A lot of great resources and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge to help people up level their game and realize, they can overcome whatever obstacles that are in their way if they just have the right mindset. So I really appreciate you sharing that information today.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to come on and get to know you and your work as well. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Triple P Nation, you got to go out and get Cassidy's book. I'm going to get it. And, as we say, right, it all starts between your ears. If we can get our minds in the right place, there's really no limitations because the only limitations we put are the ones we put between our ears. So let's work through those. Let's overcome those. Let's get our mindsets clear so we can create really powerful goals, understand why it is that we want to achieve them so we can live our best life, which we call our triple P life, which is about empowering your dreams, igniting passion, and accelerating your prosperity. So, guys, you be you, just be the best you, and I promise you'll always empower those dreams. Until next week, be well.